Right now, at this exact degree, in this exact sky, Venus and Mars are locked in a square that is less than 2 degrees from perfect. That is not a general cosmic weather report. That is a specific tension that has been building for weeks, and today it reaches its peak. Today, the pressure between what you desire and what you have been willing to fight for finds its breaking point. And that breaking point is not a destruction. It is a door. You are carrying something specific into this moment, not a vague longing, not a general sense that something is unresolved, something precise, a dynamic that has asked more of you than it returned, a connection that required you to give at full volume while the other person operated at half signal, a love that was real and lopsided at the same time. You held the standard for what this could have been, quietly, without making it a speech. You never lowered it. You also never announced it. You simply knew, somewhere below language, what was and was not enough. And today, the sky is asking you to look directly at what that knowing has built inside you. Before we go any further, like this video, subscribe, and comment below. I know what I'm worth. Not as a wish, as a declaration. Say it out loud as you type it. That phrase is not a comfort. It is a signal to your nervous system that you are present for what this transmission is about to open. Because what is happening right now is not just about one person or one relationship, it is about the end of a pattern that has governed your emotional life in ways you are only now beginning to fully see. And that pattern, the one that asked you to give more than you received and call it love, is closing today. Not metaphorically, as a precise consequence of where these planets are and what they are doing to each other right now. Stay with this. What comes next is the part most people miss. There is a specific quality to this moment that separates it from every other time you have felt something like it. You have felt the tension before. You have felt the longing before. You have felt the particular exhaustion of a connection that asked everything of you and held something back in return. But something about today is different. Something in the air has changed temperature. The pressure that has been building, not for days, not for weeks, but for years, has reached the exact degree where it cannot hold its current form any longer. What was suspended is about to move, and the direction it moves depends entirely on what you have built inside yourself during the waiting. That is what we are here to understand. You did not arrive at this video by accident. Something guided you here, something that has been navigating your life beneath the surface of the decisions you thought you were making. The soul has its own calendar, and today is circled on it. The question is not whether you are ready. The question is whether you are willing to see what ready actually looks like from inside it. You are exactly where you are supposed to be, and where you are supposed to be is on the edge of something that has been waiting a very long time to be real. Here is what the sky is doing right now, and why it matters for you specifically. Venus, at 24 degrees of Virgo, is the planet that governs what you love, what you value, and the standard you carry internally about what love should feel like. In Virgo, that love does not perform itself. It does not wave. It is precise, particular, quietly exacting. It knows the difference between someone who means what they say and someone who says what you want to hear. Venus in Virgo does not fall for surfaces. It waits. It watches. It holds a standard so quietly that many people around it do not even know the standard exists until they fall below it, and then they feel the chill. Mars, at 23 degrees of Gemini, is something else entirely. Mars is the planet that governs action, desire, pursuit, the forward movement of wanting something and going to get it. In Gemini, Mars moves fast and changes direction easily. It can want two things simultaneously. It can pursue something with genuine intensity and still not commit fully to the direction, still leave a door open behind it, still keep options alive in the background while the primary signal runs at full volume. Mars in Gemini is not dishonest. It is genuinely pulled in more than one direction at once. That is its nature, and that nature has created a specific kind of confusion in the dynamic you have been living inside. When Venus squares Mars, when these two planets sit at 90 degrees to each other, the tension between what is valued and what is pursued reaches a point of maximum friction. Something has to break, or something has to clarify. The square is not a gentle aspect. It does not whisper. It presses. It creates a pressure that forces the question that has been deferred, avoided, rationalized, the question of whether the pursuit is willing to match the value. whether the desire is willing to become a direction, whether what has been said in pieces will now be said in full. And this particular square, at this particular degree, with Venus ruling your sense of worth and Mars ruling the energy of the person who has been orbiting yours, this is not just a tension. This is a conclusion. Add to this the weight of Saturn moving backward through Aries, tightening its grip on unfinished business. Saturn does not allow emotional accounts to run permanently in deficit. It is the planet that governs what becomes permanent, what gets built versus what collapses under its own incompleteness. In retrograde, Saturn is not moving forward, it is reviewing. It is returning to what was left unresolved and asking, with its particular brand of cold clarity, whether this is a foundation or a fiction. Whether what has been called love was built on something real or on the mutual avoidance of something real. Saturn retrograde in Aries does not ask this gently. It asks it until the answer is honest. This is not two planets making a difficult angle. This is the universe demanding an honest account of what this dynamic has actually been. And you specifically, have been holding the answer for longer than you have been given credit for. This portal does not open for everyone standing at the edge of an unresolved connection. It opens only for a specific kind of person, and that person is recognizable by what they chose not to do. You did not reach when reaching would have cost you something you couldn't name but could feel. You have been inside moments, real moments, specific moments, the kind that arrive without ceremony on ordinary afternoons, where the impulse to collapse the distance was right there, available, justifiable. The justifications wrote themselves. You were tired of the tension. You were lonely in a way that had no address. The reaching would have felt like relief, at least temporarily. And you stopped. Not because you didn't want to, because something in you, quiet and unannounced, recognized what the reaching would have traded away. That was not passivity. That was not resignation. That was dignity operating below the level of conscious decision. What you built in those moments, in the specific repeated act of holding your standard without making it a speech, without requiring anyone else to validate it, without turning it into an ultimatum or a performance, is the exact credential this portal requires. Not patience, not waiting, a quality of self-knowledge that comes only from having stayed true to something you could not fully articulate, because the standard was not a rule you had adopted, it was something you knew from inside. And there was a fork, maybe more than one. A moment where one direction was easier, where releasing the standard would have been understood, where nobody would have judged you for taking the less costly road. The other direction required something. It required you to trust what you knew over what you felt in the moment. It required you to hold something real over something immediately relieving. You chose the harder direction, quietly, without announcement, without knowing whether it was right. That choice, that specific, private, unwitnessed decision, is the reason you are here now instead of somewhere else. That was not love failing. That was love being honest. What the dynamic was offering was not a match for what you were carrying. That was not you being unworthy of receiving. That was the other person being unready to give at the level you were offering. And that was not the universe withholding. That was the universe building you, specifically, into someone capable of receiving something real when it finally arrives. The grief of that recognition is real. Let it be real. What you held, what you chose, what it cost you, none of that was small. But here is what also needs to be said. The delay was not cruelty, it was precision. If this moment had arrived earlier, 6 months ago, a year ago, when the longing was at its highest and the discernment was still being formed, the reunion would have felt like resolution but functioned as repetition. The same dynamic in new language, the same cost paid again because the lesson was not yet complete. You would have shown up to the same relational contract wearing a different expression. The other person would have returned to the same version of the dynamic, and you would have called it change because you wanted it to be. The pattern would have continued, dressed as progress, and you would have paid the same price twice. That is what the silence was protecting you from. Saturn governs these delays. It does not open doors until both the lesson and the person are ready to handle what the open door requires. Saturn is not interested in your comfort timeline. It is interested in whether what gets built will actually hold, and what it was watching for, what it was waiting to confirm, was not that enough time had passed. It was watching for whether something inside you had genuinely changed at the level below the story you were telling about yourself. Not performance, not the version of moving on that is really just the original longing wearing a calmer expression. Actual change, the kind that lives in the body, in the quality of decisions, in what the nervous system can and cannot return to. The version of you that exists now, the one who held the standard, who chose the harder fork, who carried what needed to be carried without requiring anyone to witness the carrying. That person did not exist 2 years ago in the same form. What is different now is not your feelings. What is different is the ground beneath your feelings. The silence is over. Not because enough time has passed, but because the person who walks through this door now is not the same person who would have arrived earlier. You grew into the exact shape this moment required. That growth is what finally makes the door possible. Now, while you are sitting with what the delay has built, there is something happening on the other side of the silence that you need to understand. The person connected to you right now is not suppressing what they feel. They are not rationalizing it. They are sitting at the edge of something they have not yet said, held in place not by avoidance, but by the full weight of what honesty would require them to admit. They know what they feel. They have known for longer than they have acknowledged, even to themselves, and what is holding them at the edge of action is not fear of you. It is fear of what saying it out loud would require of them, not just toward you, but toward themselves. The admission they are approaching is not simple. It is not just, "I want to be with you." It is something older than that, something with more weight. It is the admission that the calculation they have been running, the one that kept a door open elsewhere, kept a version of their options alive, kept the full commitment at a just barely safe distance. That calculation has stopped producing the result it was designed to produce. It was designed to keep them comfortable. It is no longer doing that. The comfort ran out, and what's underneath it is something they have been reluctant to face directly. This transit puts pressure on exactly that reluctance. Venus square Mars does not allow the space between wanting and committing to stay comfortable. The Gemini energy that let Mars operate in 2 directions simultaneously is being challenged directly by Venus in Virgo's demand for something precise, something particular, something that does not waver. The square is forcing a question they cannot keep filing under, something I'll address later. What they are feeling in their body right now is specific. There is a quality of interruption in their ordinary days, a moment in the middle of something routine where awareness of you arrives not as a thought they invited, but as a fact that was already there. The awareness has a different weight than it used to. Where it once could be set aside with moderate effort, it now requires active management to redirect, and the management is getting more effortful. Not less, more. They are sitting with something that feels too large to speak and too persistent to continue ignoring. The honesty it requires is not just honesty about you, it is honesty about who they have been in this dynamic, about what they were asking you to absorb while they sorted out what they actually wanted. That is a difficult admission for someone who has organized their interior life around keeping the story simple, but the story has stopped being simple. This transit made sure of it. They know. They have always known. Today is the day the knowing became too heavy to carry quietly. You are standing at a fork right now, and the fork has nothing to do with them. The fork is interior. It is the space between 2 completely different relationships with what happens next. And the difference between them is not dramatic from the outside. It does not look like a big decision. No one watching from across the room would see it. The difference lives entirely in the quality of what is happening inside you. You are not being tested. You are being asked to show yourself what you have actually become. One relationship with what comes next looks like this. The mind running a management process, monitoring, anticipating, preparing for every possible version of how this resolves or doesn't, and subtly steering the situation toward the outcome that feels safest. The internal sensation is a slight tightening, not dramatic, but constant. A quality of thought that moves faster than the situation requires. A hands-on relationship with uncertainty that cannot allow things to simply unfold, because unfolding without intervention feels like losing control of something important. That version is not wrong. It is familiar. It served a real purpose when the ground beneath you was less stable than it is now. It was protective. But the protection it offers now has a cost, and the cost is this. You cannot simultaneously grip the outcome and allow the real thing to arrive. The gripping and the allowing cannot coexist in the same moment. The other relationship with what comes next is quieter. It does not announce itself. It does not feel like triumph or resolution or the satisfaction of having finally let go. It feels like a weight being set down without ceremony, a quality of breath that is 1 inch deeper, the specific sensation of the jaw releasing in the middle of an ordinary thought without you having instructed it. Not indifference, not giving up, an honest, unheld relationship with what you cannot control, not because you have decided to accept it philosophically, but because something in you has actually, physically, already set it down. What if the real arrival cannot find its way to you while you are busy steering it? What if the thing you are trying to control is exactly the thing that needs to move on its own? That question, held in the body rather than analyzed in the mind, will show you exactly where you actually are, not where you intended to be, not where you hope you are. Where you are. This brings us to the deepest layer, the thing this connection was always actually about. Soul contracts are not romantic arrangements. They are not promises of specific outcomes. They are precise agreements, made at a level below conscious memory, about what must be activated, confronted, and integrated before the soul can move into its next form. And the contract at the center of this specific connection was never really about the other person. It was about what you were willing to give in relation to what you were willing to receive. It was about reciprocity, not as a concept, but as a lived practice. The lesson this connection came to deliver was the precise difference between depth and imbalance, between giving from genuine fullness and giving from the hope that giving enough would eventually create return, between loving someone and funding the proof of your own worth through the quality of your love. Those are not the same country, even though they feel identical from inside the experience. You gave real love. That is not in question. What the contract was asking you to examine was the energy underneath the giving, whether you were offering from abundance or from the unspoken calculation that depth given freely would eventually generate depth received. That is not weakness. That is intelligence wearing the costume of generosity. It is the version of reciprocity that asks for return without ever saying so out loud, which means it never actually negotiates for what it needs. It gives and hopes and interprets the giving itself as evidence of worthiness. And when the return does not match the investment, it gives more, because more, at some level, was supposed to fix it. This is the grief that deserves a full moment. The grief is not just about this person, it is about the version of yourself that believed that the quality of your love was a language anyone capable of real connection would eventually learn to answer in. That belief was not foolish, it was generous to a fault. But the cost it carried, the years of full offering met with partial presence, the depth met with comfortable ambiguity, the standard held quietly while hoping someone would finally rise to it, that cost was real. And it changed you. Saturn, moving backward through Aries right now, is returning to that contract and reading its final clause, the clause that says, when the lesson is genuinely integrated, not performed, not told to others as a story, not adopted as a philosophy, but lived as a new set of choices at the level of the body, the contract is complete, not closed. Complete. There is a difference. What ends here is not the love. What ends is the version of the connection that could only exist while the lesson was still unfinished. The love, if it was real, does not require the dynamic to survive. The dynamic needed the imbalance to function. The love does not. And your body has already begun to register that completion before the mind finished working out the logic. You may notice the jaw releasing. Not dramatically, not in a single wave of catharsis, but in the middle of a sentence you are speaking, or a meal you are preparing, or a morning you are moving through. A sudden awareness that it was held, and now it isn't. The breath that goes somewhere deeper than the last several months of breathing. Not a sigh. Something quieter than a sigh. A breath that simply has more room than it used to. A name passes through your awareness, maybe this person's, maybe someone else's from this whole chapter, and it passes through. That is what is new. Not that it doesn't arrive. It arrives. But it arrives and it continues moving, the way weather moves through a place without the place having to resist it. Where it once arrived with a physical hook behind it, a pull, a tightening, a ripple that took effort to smooth, it is beginning to arrive differently, like something the body has processed enough of that it can finally move in real time rather than storing it. Sleep has been different, even if you haven't named it yet. Arriving earlier, leaving less residue in the first minutes of waking. The quality of the morning is different, not warmer necessarily, not easier in the surface sense, but less braced, less organized around anticipation of something difficult. The mornings of the last year had a quality of preparation in them, a low-level readiness for something that was coming. That readiness is beginning to lift. This is not the quiet of having given up. This is the quiet of something that has genuinely finished. The body knows the difference, even when the mind is still catching up. As the release deepens, something else becomes available, something that was previously using most of its energy on the management and the bracing and the carrying. Decisions have a different quality now. Not because the choices themselves got simpler, because the internal conflict that used to inform every major decision, am I giving too much? Am I settling? Am I seeing this clearly, or am I seeing it through the lens of what I want it to be? That conflict is losing its volume. Where it once required deliberate effort to hear what you actually knew over the noise of what you wanted to be true, it is beginning to become possible to simply know, without the argument, without the second guessing, without the part of you that kept interrupting with a counter-narrative. The things that used to feel exciting but secretly exhausting are beginning to register as hollow before they even fully arrive. The invitation that comes with a familiar undertow, the connection that offers warmth alongside a demand for more than it returns. These are no longer things you have to think your way through. The body has already made the assessment. Quietly, without drama, without a moment you can point to, it simply stopped being available for certain costs. What used to feel like safety, the familiar, the known, the half-connection that was at least reliable in its incompleteness, now registers as a ceiling rather than a floor. The universe is no longer trying to guide you toward alignment. It is beginning to respond to the alignment you already carry, and that is a completely different experience. What used to feel like looking for signs is beginning to feel like receiving confirmations. The difference is directional. One is searching, one is being found. You are not waiting to become someone. The becoming already happened, in private, without announcement, in the exact window where it had to happen to be real. What is here now is not preparation. It is arrival. Something specific is also shifting in what your nervous system can and cannot accommodate. And this is not a decision you are making. It is something that has already been made at a level beneath conscious choice. Being held at emotional arm's length by someone who knows exactly what they feel, the specific experience of being in a dynamic where the other person's internal clarity is not in question, where they know where you know they know. And yet the full honesty that would change everything keeps being deferred. That is no longer something your system can call acceptable. Not with anger, not with resentment, simply as a fact about what is and is not compatible with where you are now. The weight of a connection carried entirely on one side, the specific exhaustion of being the person who names the thing, who holds the space, who maintains the thread when the other person makes themselves comfortable in the ambiguity of not quite committing to a direction. Not because they don't feel it, because naming it would require something of them, and asking them to name it has always, somehow, become your work to do. That is no longer sustainable. Not as a moral position, as a biological reality. The body has identified the pattern the way a key that once fit a lock recognizes, without confusion, that it no longer does. And the experience of your depth being received as evidence of too much, of your willingness to be fully present, fully honest, fully in the conversation, being met with someone who used that willingness as proof that you were asking for something unreasonable, that too, the body has filed that one permanently. Explaining your depth to someone who processes the explanation as complaint is not something you have energy for anymore, not because you have given up on being understood, because you now know from inside your body rather than as a concept what being genuinely understood feels like, and the contrast makes the other thing impossible to accept as a substitute. This is not hardness. This is discernment made permanent by experience. You did not close yourself. You clarified. And clarity does not reduce what is possible. It removes what was never going to be real anyway, and makes the remaining space available for what actually is. Now, about what happens if this soul steps back into your field. If they return, the first question is not whether you still want this. You know the answer to that. The question, the only question that matters, is whether what returns is the same version of the dynamic or something that is genuinely different at its foundation. If this soul steps back into your field now, they will not be returning to the same relational territory, not because you have restructured your presentation or prepared a different response, because you are actually different, and different people create different relational fields around them. What they return to is not what they remember. What they return to is someone who is fully present, fully clear, and no longer in the business of having hope distort what they actually see. This is the specific thing that changes the reunion, if it comes. You will receive what arrives accurately. For the first time in this connection, the signal will not be bent by longing on one end. What is real will register as real. What is the same pattern wearing a different expression will register as that too, not with bitterness, not with the satisfaction of having been right, but with the clean, physical, undeniable recognition of a body that has processed enough of this particular lesson to know the difference. What does your body register first? Before the words, before the story of what their return means, before the mind forms a verdict, there will be a physical fact. A quality of ease or a quality of effort, a settling or a bracing, something in the muscles of the hands, in the quality of breath, in the temperature of the moment. And you will trust that signal because you have learned at some cost that it is more accurate than the story. What would the return require to be real? Not grand gestures, not a speech, sustained, consistent, unperformed presence, the kind that does not need an audience, the kind that does not require your interpretation to seem like love, that simply is love, legible on its own terms. That is what passes and what does not. And you will know immediately, not because you have become cynical, but because you have become clear. If they do not return, that too will be legible, not as rejection. You know now what rejection would feel like. And this is not it. What their absence confirms is not that you were not enough. It confirms that the lesson is complete from your side, and that whatever work remains is theirs to carry. That is not a consolation you have chosen to adopt. It is something you are actually built from now. The version of you that needed their arrival to feel whole has finished its contract. What remains does not need to be confirmed by them. It simply is. Both doors open onto something real, not because the outcomes are equal, because you are no longer different people depending on which one walks through. That steadiness is the thing. That is everything. If something in this transmission landed, not just as a thought, but somewhere specific in your body, take one moment, like this video, subscribe, and write in the comments, "I receive what is real." Say it out loud as you type it. Not for the algorithm, for your own nervous system. Words spoken with genuine intention complete something that silent reading leaves open. That phrase, "I receive what is real," is not wishful thinking. It is an instruction to your own system about what you are now available for and what you are not. And if someone in your life is standing in the middle of an unresolved dynamic they cannot quite name yet, share this with them. You do not need to explain why. Your soul already knows who. What Venus and Mars are creating in the sky today is not a wound, it is a completion. The tension that reaches its peak today does not leave you damaged, it leaves you free. Not in the dramatic sense of freedom that announces itself with a feeling. In the quiet sense, the sense of setting down something heavy that you had been carrying for so long you forgot it wasn't part of you. And now, in the particular stillness that follows the setting down, there is something new taking up the space. Not a feeling about someone else, a knowledge about yourself. Precise, earned, and finally, quietly, undeniable. That knowledge is already here. It was here before you found this. This only helped you see it. What you do next, you step forward from that. Not from hope, from ground. And ground does not feel the way you expected it to feel. That is worth saying directly, because most people spend years reaching for a feeling they imagined would arrive like a wave. A clear, unmistakable sense of resolution that would finally make everything that came before it make sense. That wave does not come. What comes instead is quieter and more durable. It arrives as a quality of mornings, a quality of decisions, the specific absence of a particular kind of internal noise that was so constant you stopped registering it as noise and started registering it as the sound of your own thinking. where it once took a deliberate act of will to remember what you actually knew, underneath the longing, underneath the hope, underneath the story you kept rewriting in his or her favor, it now simply surfaces. Without effort, without the argument, the knowing has moved from something you reached for to something you stand on. That is not a small change. That is the whole architecture of the interior, reoriented from the ground up. And the people around you are beginning to feel it before they can name it. Not because you have announced anything, not because your surface presentation has changed dramatically, but because the field around a person who has stopped waiting for someone else to confirm their worth is measurably different from the field around a person who is still running that question. Others feel the difference in the quality of your attention, in the way you inhabit a room, not louder, not more dominant, but more fully present. Less of you is elsewhere. Less of you is managing the part that is still unresolved, because less of you is unresolved. What arrives in a conversation with you now meets more of you than it used to, and people feel met in a way they did not before. This is why certain connections are beginning to move differently around you. Not because you changed your strategy, because you changed your frequency, and frequency is what the field responds to. There is one more thing worth naming about what the Sun conjunct Jupiter in Leo is adding to this specific moment, because this transit is not just about the closure, it is also about what the closure makes possible. The Sun and Jupiter are sitting together right now in Leo, less than 3 degrees apart. That combination, the planet of identity merging with the planet of expansion in the sign most associated with genuine self-expression, is not background noise. It is a direct amplification of whatever is most true and most yours right now. Jupiter does not invent things. It enlarges what is already present. It takes what is real and makes it louder, bigger, more visible, more capable of moving into spaces it could not reach before. When Jupiter sits with the Sun, what is authentically yours expands. Not what you are performing, not what you have been managing, what is actually, genuinely, already true inside you. And in Leo, that expansion carries a specific quality. Leo is not the sign of careful self-presentation, it is the sign of genuine radiance, the kind that comes not from effort but from being fully, unapologetically, exactly what you are. The version of you that emerges after this karmic closing is not quieter or more contained, it is freer. The energy that was previously allocated to the managing, the carrying, the maintaining of a standard that nobody else acknowledged, that energy is being returned to you. It does not disappear, it reallocates. And what it gets reallocated toward is the expression of what is most true and most alive in you. This is not the universe rewarding you. This is the universe reflecting back what you have already built. The expansion was always going to arrive. It arrives now because now there is genuine space for it to enter. Stay with that for a moment. Genuine space, the kind that is made not by clearing a surface but by completing something, the kind that arrives when a weight you did not know you were still carrying is finally, irrevocably, set down. There is also something specific in the Mercury sextile Venus today. Mercury at 19 degrees of Cancer making a gentle, supportive angle to Venus in Virgo. Mercury governs language, communication, the way things get said and received. In Cancer, Mercury speaks from feeling, not from logic. It communicates what is emotionally true before it is rationally organized. The sextile to Venus means that today, the words that have been circling the feeling, the ones that have been sitting just below the surface for weeks or months, fully formed but not yet spoken, have an opening. Not a forced opening, a gentle one, a door left ajar rather than kicked through. What this means in practical terms is that conversations which have been waiting for the right conditions now have those conditions available, not guaranteed, available. If something needs to be said, by you or toward you, the energy today supports honesty delivered with care. The kind of communication that is both true and kind simultaneously, not softened into something vague, not sharpened into something weaponized, simply honest, simply feeling forward, simply said. You do not have to act on this, but you are allowed to notice that the window is open. What the full picture of today's sky is telling you, Venus square Mars, Saturn retrograde doing its accounting, Sun and Jupiter amplifying what is real, Mercury and Venus creating a channel for honest language, is not that something is ending so that emptiness can follow. It is that something is completing so that something else can begin on honest ground. The completion and the beginning are not sequential, they are simultaneous. The door closes and opens in the same gesture. The karmic timeline that closes today was not a mistake. It was not something that happened to you. It was something you were in, fully, at real cost, with real love, and what you are walking away from it with is not a wound and not a lesson filed in the past. It is a version of yourself that could not have been built any other way, a version of yourself that knows the difference, in the body, between depth and imbalance, that knows what genuine reciprocity feels like, not as a concept, but as a physical experience, that knows what it is to hold a standard quietly, without making it a performance, without requiring external confirmation that the standard was worth holding, that knowing is not transferable. It cannot be taught. It can only be earned at precisely the cost you paid for it, and it is the thing, the specific, irreplaceable thing, that makes what comes next possible at all. So here is where you stand, right now, on August 1st, with Venus and Mars locked in their final degree of friction before the angle begins to separate. You are not at the beginning of something. You are not at the end of something. You are at the moment when the long work of becoming is recognized, quietly, without ceremony, from the inside, as having actually been completed. Not almost, not nearly, completely. The contract fulfilled. The lesson not just understood but lived. The ground not just intended but built. What comes next does not come to save you. It comes to meet you. And meeting requires two people who are actually present, not managing, not performing, not carrying the weight of something unresolved, but genuinely, fully, clearly there. You are there. You have been there for longer than you know. Today, the sky confirms it.